Why take FPL advice from one expert when you can take advice from 100 of them? Welcome to FPL Mate, my name is Dan, and today we have some fabulous information from the FPL experts, not just for those transfer trends, but also what to do with your assistant manager, whether you are only playing it this week or if you have it on Moyes from last week and you're thinking about changing it around. We've got some crystal clear answers from those who know FPL the best. So, of course, a massive shout out to the experts this week, all 100 of them. And apologies, guys, this video is coming out this morning. It was intended that this video would go out last night, but because there is still a few days until deadline, it was a little bit harder to get the responses on this video, to get the data for you guys. But we did get it in the end, so massive thank you to all of our participants. Let's see just what they're up to. So let's give an overview here. So 55% of our experts are using one transfer this week, with 23% opting to use multiple transfers, 2 transfers, and just one of our experts making 3 transfers this week. There are a few hits flying around this week as well, with not too many of our experts rolling transfers last week in the end. So don't be too afraid to take a hit if that is needed. However, none of our experts are using the wild card this week. That is being saved for later on in the season as part of a wider chip strategy. We also see 21% of our experts making no transfers at all. But I have to be honest with you guys, who is making how many transfers is not super interesting this week. What's more interesting is the transfers that are being made, not just in their starting 11, but also in that assistant manager position. So let's kick off with the top global picks. Who are the overall FPL player base bringing in this week? And do our experts agree with these picks? Well, certainly with Cliver and Kirkes, these are 2 players that our experts really do like this week, and we're seeing high trends and a lot of convergence between the overall player base and the experts in terms of picking these 2 players. There's also significant interest in Rodgers and Burmo and Semenyo, but outside of that, there is a lot of difference, and I find it super interesting when something like this happens. Wood and Elanga, despite being very popular picks in the overall player base, our experts are less prone to knee-jerk decisions. If a player scores well the previous game week, that doesn't necessarily always mean that the experts will be picking them up for the following game week. They may have other ideas to try and predict future points rather than purely relying on past points. So we are actually seeing our experts selling Wood. Well, one of our experts is selling Wood and nobody's buying him, and Elanga sales only for him. In terms of Mateta, a lot of experts do own him, but there's been no change, no new managers picking him up. Same with Gakpo and same with Rashford. And one thing that we should realize about Mateta, Gakpo and Rashford is that they are 3 players who are going to have a blank game week in game week 29. So that's also going to be a big theme of today's video. We are going to see our experts thinking about the players who do not have a fixture in game week 29, and that is going to be your Liverpool, Aston Villa, who obviously double this week, but also your Newcastle and Crystal Palace. So remember that as we go through the next section of the video, because this trend is very, very clear. We are seeing a lot of Newcastle and a lot of Crystal Palace players in particular being sold this game week by our experts, as these expert managers look to enter into game week 29 with the fewest amount of blank game week players as possible. But the real headline on this particular page is we have a manager in the #1 transferred out positions. Now, if you asked me at the beginning of the season whether we would ever see David Moyes in a buy, sell, keep, avoid video as the most popular transfer out, I would have to ask, what were you smoking? But we are in a new world of FPL with the assistant manager chip, and all 37 of last game week's David Moyes owners will be transferring him out using one of their transfers on their assistant manager this week. If you have Moyes, you are going to want to sell him according to our experts. And we're going to talk about who the best replacements are in this video. And like I mentioned before, we have some very, very clear answers, which is always good to see. But let's go through some of these other players before we delve deeper into the world of assistant managers, because we do see, like I say, a lot of Newcastle and Crystal Palace players in here. In fact, the next 4, all from those teams. 17 transfers transfers out for Gordon ahead of his game against Man City. Ismaila Sarr and the Crystal Palace boys will be facing against Everton this week. Sarr and also Eze are the transfers out for Crystal Palace players. We see Hall with a few transfers out here as well as Isak and Murphy, which is a little bit more interesting. I'll speak a bit more on Isak in the next page, but we're seeing a lot of Newcastle, we're seeing a lot of Crystal Palace. With the exception of Munoz, our experts want to keep Munoz at least for the time being. A couple of other players to note here. Bruno Fernandes with a few transfers out. Same with Ahmad. Maybe those Manchester United boys are disappointing a little bit at the moment and therefore could potentially be sold. And what we're seeing is a lot of midfielders who are being transferred this week, because it does seem to be a week of the midfielders. That is going to be the primary place you are going to be spending your transfers on the outfield positions this game week. And finally, Trent Alexander-Arnold. Bit of a debate here. Only 3 transfers out of the 82 owners of Trent among our experts. And I have to say, it is very much injury dependent. Some people are assuming Trent is injured. Other people think he is going to be fit. Most of the experts will be waiting for more news on this one. But, of course, we asked them early on in the week to get you the information as quickly as possible. So you never know how that one's going to turn out. But the majority of our experts will be keeping Trent, assuming he is fit and potentially even if he is not. But with the players to sell out the way, who will our experts be buying this game week? And before I tell you, make sure you drop a like on the video. It really does help out the channel so much. And if you want to follow along with the expert tips and trends every single game week, follow along to get yourself a great FPL rank. Make sure you are subscribed with those notifications on so you don't miss an episode. Let's keep it moving. And here we have it. Unai Emery. Again, if you asked me about this, Emery being in a 100 experts video as the #1 transfer in, I'd be like, has he just decided to enter a playing career? Is he now the player manager of Aston Villa? Maybe not. But we do see him as the most popular transfer in. Crazy to say. I still can't quite get my head around it. But 34 transfers in for the 0.8 million manager. And it definitely has to be said that considering Moyes was sold by 37 of our experts, 34 of them are bringing in Emery. And I know a lot of people who own Moyes are thinking, who should I bring in? Who should I replace Moyes with as my assistant manager? And it seems that it is near enough unanimous among experts that Emery is the replacement. I was expecting a bit of a divide here. Maybe we'd see some different strategies emerging, but there's a lot of agreement here. And when there's a lot of agreement among experts, you usually know it's probably going to be a good idea. So I think you've got a really clear answer, Moyes owners. Transfer him to Emery. They're only a 0.3 million difference, so it should be pretty easy to use that money to make the small upgrade to your manager. And you don't have to remove any Liverpool players or anything like that in order to get a manager like Arne Slot. But Emery is in as the new manager replacement for Moyes. Again, we will talk more about assistant managers at the end of the video and do more of an overview because there are some new assistant manager users this week as well. But let's go through some of these players. Kluivert, 26 transfers in. He is certainly the flavour of the week in terms of those actual players. So we're going to see some significant increase in ownership for him in game week 25. Dango is also in here as an alternative, a cheaper alternative, perhaps with 10 transfers in for him. Kirkes, 7 transfers, 7 new owners, and it's gonna be quite interesting for Kirkes owners. He's actually a bit of a differential ahead of his game against Southampton. Even the experts, not too many people will be able to get him in, so he could be really interesting. We also see Rodgers in here, Semenyo and Watkins, but with the caveat that he is available. Our experts they did say to me, Dan, this is what I'm planning, but obviously I need to know about the injury issue first of all. Is Watkins going to be available? If he is, I would like to transfer him in. Isak to Watkins is a move that will be popular if Watkins is available, but we don't know that yet, unfortunately. We'll update you later on in the week. A few more transfers in for Brian and Burmo. He is becoming firmly a part of the expert template. And finally, Howson for the Bournemouth cheaper defender there if you have a more restricted budget, and Iraola, 2 new owners for the Bournemouth manager as well. So nowhere near the numbers of Emery, but still a little bit of interest in Iraola as a new manager for Gameweek 25. But it's all about Emery. Even Iraola is ahead of Arne Slot. There's only going to be one new Slot owner among our experts this week to add to all of those who had their assistant manager chip active on Slot from last week. All of which, by the way, are sticking with Slot for Game Week 25. But we need to continue on, my friends, and have a look at the template. So we have had one change to the template and no major shifts in the most popular players among experts. And I think that's largely because so many of our experts are indeed using their transfer on a manager rather than an outfield player. So let's go through this anyway. So no change on Fabianski and Pickford. These are the two most popular goalkeepers to have in your squad among experts, of course. Small drop off for Alexander-Arnold and Mykolenko, but Gabriel sees a slight increase with no change on Robinson and Munoz. That is the popular back five at the moment, with 3 playing each week. Usually Trent, Gabriel, and a combination of one of Robinson, Mykolenko, and Munoz for that third slot. In the midfield position, no change on Salah and Palmer. Still going to be 100% owned. You cannot go without these essential guys. And Burmo sees a small increase, as does Morgan Rogers ahead of his double game week. And we have our one and only new addition to the expert template, which is going to be Justin Kluivert, coming up to 53% ownership. He is going to be owned by over half of the experts, and even those without Kluivert, many of them will have the Bournemouth midfield alternatives, Semenyo and Ouattara, Dango Ouattara, as I should say. Up front, Isak, small drop of 3%, so he is still super high owned, but a small decrease. No change on Gakpo. He is going to remain at 49%. And Chris Wood is our final player here with a minor drop. So really not too much change with the forward positions. It seems to be mostly the midfield that's had the biggest shake-up in terms of template and transfer moves this game week. So make those midfield transfers. As for the average scores for experts, 88.8 points so far. Because remember, guys, I am recording this video before the Liverpool and Everton fixture. So I do expect this average score to increase. But you know what's even crazier? 88.8 average score here. And yet the average current rank has actually dropped around 20,000 places so far. It might bounce back by the end of the game week, but our experts, despite having a phenomenal average score, have somehow managed red arrows this week. So it's a tough week, clearly. You need to have a mega score if you want to get any green arrows, which is quite mad. 88% of our experts are within the top 1 million right now, 35% in the top 100k, and 5% in the top 10k. I expect each of these numbers to increase as we go through each game week, particularly as we enter chip season, where it's going to be super interesting for these expert videos, I'm sure. So, suggested transfers. Let's talk about some combo transfers you can make. And I think a really popular move this week, if you do have someone like Gordon or maybe Eza there as well, or just a midfielder, could be Bruno, a player who you're not super keen on right now, downgrading one of the more expensive midfielders down to a Kluivert at 5.9 million is going to free up enough budget to make a variety of moves. For example, that might allow you to upgrade Moyes to Emery if you don't have enough money in the bank to make that move elsewhere. Gordon down to Kluivert could also facilitate an Ezra up to an Mbeumo. So you could do something like that, freeing up the money for the upgrade on Mbeumo. Gordon to Kluivert could also be used in combination to take one of the cheaper midfielders you have to someone else. You could do maybe Murphy or Enzo Fernandez, or whoever is super cheap. Maybe have a Dibbling in your team. If you have a super cheap guy, you can move them to Dango or Semenyo potentially there as well. So there's a variety of different things you can do by downgrading someone like Gordon, Eze, Bruno Fernandes, and those are the kind of players our experts are looking at downgrading this week. In terms of those direct transfers, there is a decent amount of options, most of which are in midfield, as we mentioned. So if you do have Moyes, straight switch switch to Emery, perfect, easy, straightforward. We don't need to talk about that one anymore. If you have Gordon, you could make a straight move to Cliver or Mbermo. If you can't quite afford to move Sarr up to a Cliver, you could move like an Ismaila Sarr to Dango or Rogers. I think those transfer moves work pretty well as well. And finally, I've got Hall to Kirkes as an option for you. Although, of course, if you do have any other defenders that you kind of want to get rid of right now, and you can afford Kirkes or maybe Howson, those are the kind of defensive moves we might be looking at making. And with that said, let's have a look at captaincy. And I'm afraid it's a boring one this week, guys. So boring that we may as well cancel captaincy for Game Week 25, since 100% of our experts will be captaining Mr. Mo Salah for his double game week against Wolves and Aston Villa. Yeah, it is very rare that we see 100% of experts agree on something. There's always one or two people trying to play things a little bit different, but not this game week, guys. 100% Mo Salah for what, the second or third time this season. And by the way, in all of the previous seasons of FPL where I've been making these videos, it's never happened. We've never hit 100%. And yet this season, Salah is doing so well that we are now hitting 100% expert captaincy on Salah multiple times in the season. Absolutely crazy. This is the state of FPL right now. We're playing with 10 players. But anyway, guys, the one way to benefit from captaining Salah is to use your triple captain. And 2% of our experts will be using the triple captain this game week. But 2%, not a super strong trend. So I don't know if we pay too much attention to that, but it is worth noting 2 of our experts will be triple captaining Salah this game week. And let's finalize things by having a look at the assistant managers. And by the way, guys, do let me know if you'd like to see this in future videos, if you'd like to do an expert assistant manager roundup each week. Certainly in the more interesting weeks for assistant managers, might be kind of fun to do. Let me know in the comment section. But I've got this graphic for you. We've got this data for you. Hopefully this is going to be helpful, useful, interesting, whatever you like to take from these videos. But 78% of our experts actually ended up activating their assistant manager chip in Game Week 24. So a lot of pre-existing assistant managers already on the field of play. We also will see 5% of our experts activating the assistant manager in Game Week 25. So we looked at triple captain already, but it seems the assistant manager chip is more popular if you haven't played it already. So by the time we get to Game Week 26, we're going to see the vast majority of our experts will have already used their assistant manager chip, and in fact only 17% will be waiting to use their assistant manager in a future game week. So minority there really. But in terms of what the total assistant manager numbers look like ahead of Game Week 25, we're going to see 46% of experts on slot, all but one of which have carried over slots from last game week and are keeping him as their previous assistant manager now into Game Week 25 as well. A lot of new Emery owners gone from 0 to 34. So 34 of our experts will have Emery as their assistant manager. And finally, a couple of new additions to Iraola. We're going to see 3 of our experts with Iraola as the assistant manager, and there are no others. These are the only 3 assistant managers active among our experts ahead of Game Week 25. So make of that what you will. What I will say is, even though all of the Moyes owners are moving to Emery pretty much, we are still seeing that slots will be the most popular assistant manager. But what I think is interesting is that our experts, it's not that they don't like slots as the assistant manager, because they clearly do, but what they don't necessarily like is selling a Liverpool player in order to get slots into your team ahead of Game Week 25. I feel like if you kind of made your bed last game week, now you sleep in it. If you didn't go for slot as your assistant manager last week, you kind of just roll with a different assistant manager ahead of Game Week 25. But this is where things are at the moment. Hopefully you can extrapolate some advice from that particular a bit of information, maybe a few nuggets in there. But super curious to see how this looks next game week. Are there going to be more assistant manager transfers? Any more assistant managers being activated? We will find out in next week's episode of the 100 Experts. But of course, guys, that is going to be the end of today's video. If you did enjoy it, make sure you do drop a like. Massively appreciated. Do subscribe if you're new around here as well. And we will be back with my team selection on tomorrow's video, I suppose. Yeah, there we go. See you later, mates. Bye-bye.